But a right duty is not to be taken as permission to make exceptions to the maxim of actions, but only as permission to limit one maxim of duty by another. For example, love of one's neighbour in general by love of one's parents, by which in fact the field for the practice of virtue is widened. The wider the duty, therefore, the more imperfect is a man's obligation to action, as he nevertheless brings closer to narrow duty, duties of right, the maxim of complying with right duty in his disposition, so much the more perfect is his virtuous action. Immanuel Kant. In my past lectures, I talked about the duties, the moral duties that we as human beings have according to Kant. And I talked about how there are both duties towards others, which is what is usually commonly agreed on, which is what usually people think of when they think of morality, our duties towards others, how we deal with others, how we treat others. But there are also duties towards ourselves, which I also explained in a previous lecture. But besides this, there's another distinction that Kant makes. He says that no matter whether a duty is a duty towards others or towards ourselves, it can be categorized into two types of different duties. There are what you could call duties in the stricter or in a more narrow sense, and there are duties in the wider sense. In Kant's writings and his lectures, you find them called perfect and imperfect duties. You also find them called at times essential and non-essential duties. And this distinction is what I want to talk about here in this lecture. Generally, or briefly speaking, you could say that the essential or the perfect duties, they are duties that are about not taking something from someone. If you take someone's property, someone's freedom, someone's life, then you are violating these perfect duties. On the other hand, the imperfect or the non-essential duties are about giving something to someone, be it some sort of help, advice, money to the poor, whatever. So these duties are violated by not giving others what they need, not giving others help. While the first duties are violated by taking something from others which is already theirs. These duties you can characterize, as I said, as duties in a strict and duties in a wider sense, because the duties of the first kind, the strict ones, here it is a specific action that reason dictates for us, that reason obliges us to do. Or rather, it is the refraining from an action that reason dictates. In Kant's day, there was this talk of, not just by him, that existed before Kant already, there was this talk of, or this distinction between sins of committing a sin, and sins of omitting, or of the failure to do something. And you could say that violating your perfect duties means actively committing a crime. Hurting someone somehow, stealing, raping, murdering. While violating your imperfect duties, like not giving to the poor, or not helping when someone has an accident and is bleeding out on the street or whatever, here you don't actively commit a crime, but you fail to do a good action that you should have done. Now, the reason why you could say these are duties in the stricter or in the more narrow sense and in the wider sense is this, that when reason tells us not to do a specific crime, not to harm the rights of others, there's really only one way to do it, right? There's only one way not to murder people, and that is by simply not murdering. There's only one way not to steal from people, and that is by not taking what is theirs. So here it is directly clear what you ought to do, or rather what you ought not to do. However, when it comes to the duties in the wider sense, the imperfect duties, reason, let's say, tells us help the poor. Here Kant says it is not so much a specific action that we are obliged to do by reason, by the moral law, by the categorical imperative, but rather it is just a type of actions. We are obliged generally to help the poor, but how much and in what ways, both of that is a matter for our judgment and not a general rule. Like, okay, it would be morally good to help the poor. Let's say I donate money to good causes. But how much should I donate? Should I give 5 euros, 10 euros, 100 euros? Should I give 1% of my income, 10%? When is it enough? And also, where should I donate the money to? Should I help poor people here in my country? Should I help poor people in somewhere in the global south? Should I go to donate it to the poorest people on earth, to the poorest country? Or should I give money at all? Is that the best thing I can do? Or can I help the poor in some other way? Can I do volunteer work in a homeless shelter, in a soup kitchen or something? Or can I get politically engaged, and can I try to influence politics so that politics will help poor people more? Because maybe I think that systematically fighting poverty through different policies will be more effective than me as a singular individual donating some money. And that is the case for all the imperfect duties. Like if I witness a car accident and someone is unconscious and bleeding on the street, reason, the moral law, doesn't directly tell me what action to take. It just tells me what type of action to take. So it is clear that not helping at all, just going my own way and ignoring what just happened and what I just witnessed, that would be immoral. That is clear. But the moral action is just to help. But in what way? That is once again up to my judgment. Like, should I run over and try to do first aid? Or would it be more helpful maybe if I grab my phone and call the ambulance so that they can be here as fast as possible and so that they can help? You cannot necessarily say which specific action here is the most moral. You can definitely say which type of action would be moral, the helping type, but which type of help would actually be most helpful, that is not determined by the moral law as such. That is a matter for our judgment. I need to stress, however, that the imperfect or the non-essential duties are still moral duties to Kant. It's not a cherry on top of morality that you might as well leave out. It's not that you can say, oh, I already didn't steal, didn't murder, and so on, so I'm already a good person and I don't have to help people actively. You do. It is your moral duty. It is just that from the general moral law, you cannot directly deduce specific rules what to do. You have to follow your own power of judgment. But that shouldn't be an invitation to take things easy here. Like, you shouldn't tell yourself, oh, okay, I have a moral duty to help the poor, but I donated 50 cents this year already, so I did something for the poor, so that duty is done. I can have mental peace about it because I did my due. No, you should ask yourself, is my duty really already fulfilled by just donating 50 cents? Could I not have done more? The fact that the moral law leaves things, the specifics of morality, to our own judgment here, far from being something that makes it easy for us, that gives us peace of mind, should rather make it hard for us. We should always ask our conscience, have I really done enough? Have I really fulfilled my duty? Couldn't I, and therefore shouldn't I, have done more? Here especially it is important to take conscientiousness in the sense of Kant seriously. I will talk in its own lecture very soon about what exactly that means, but to already briefly say it here, Kant says we must be able to bet, and we must be able to take the highest bet possible, that is the bet on our eternal felicity. So we must be able to stand in front of God and say, I'm convinced I really did enough, and if I'm wrong, then go ahead, throw me into hell. And if you take it like this, I think it's easy to see that we can never really be assured. We can never really be truly convicted that we did enough. So this should not, the fact that these wider duties are wider duties, that they are imperfect duties, this should not be a reason to have mental peace and to take it easy, but rather this should be an eternal thorn in our side. This should be something that makes us always strive for more, always strive for being better. This whole difference, this whole distinction between these two types of duties is very important and very helpful for moral philosophy and for Kant. One important advantage of this is that there can no longer be a moral dilemma. Those are very popular in our time because we live in a time of moral relativism where people believe that there is no such thing as morality, as a clear moral law. And so people love these cases where seemingly you have two moral duties that contradict each other. And so therefore there is no clear right and wrong. Therefore it's not possible to say what you ought to do. That is in fact never the case, Kant says. There can never be a true moral dilemma. If that was the case, then there would indeed not be any morality, because morality is about our duty. And it must always be possible to do our duty, otherwise it cannot be our duty. That is important. I already discussed that in earlier lectures, particularly the lecture on freedom and do we have free will. The ought implies the could, Kant says. We cannot have a duty to do something if we are not capable of actually doing it. So there cannot be a true moral dilemma, and that is why Kant would say that all seeming moral dilemmas are just contradictions between perfect and imperfect duties. And in such a case, we should always prefer to do the perfect duties. That is, we should first try not to harm anyone's rights, not to sin against anyone by taking what is rightfully theirs. And then second, when we have fulfilled those duties, we can try to actually help. We can try to actively give to other people. So for example, when you go down the street and you see a beggar, sure, you might have a moral duty to help him. You might feel obliged to give him money. But if you don't have any spare money right now, you cannot just go and rob another person that walks down the street, or go and rob the store on the other side of the street, to give money that rightfully belongs to someone else to that beggar. Your first duty, your perfect duty, is not to steal anyone's property, and then only second, as an imperfect duty, you should give to the poor. So that means that you can only give from your property, but not from others' property. So yes, to Kant, Robin Hood would not be a good person. Robin Hood would be a very bad person. However, Kant would also stress that moral duties as such can never be in conflict with each other. Not even the perfect with the imperfect duties. Because there is only one moral law. All the duties come from the same law, come from the same reason. And that moral law basically doesn't dictate anything but to not contradict yourself. I talked about that in my lecture on the moral law, the categorical imperative. That the categorical imperative to Kant is basically the logical principle of non-contradiction applied to the practical. So you, in your own action, in your own judgments, in the rights you give to yourself and to others, should not contradict yourself. So therefore, only evil can self-contradict. Good cannot self-contradict. That is why Kant says duties as such can never be in conflict. It can only be the reasons of duties that can be in conflict. I mean, in the specific situation, sure, I can have the duty to give money to this beggar, but I have no money to give, so I cannot fulfill this duty unless I act against my duty not to steal from others. But that is more of a subjective than an objective problem. That's more my problem, or the world's problem, than the problem of the moral law. Because a world would be possible where the two duties don't contradict each other. Like a world could be possible where I have more money to give. Or where there is no beggar, because there are no poor people. Or even where I can go to the other person on the street or to the store across the street and tell them that there's a beggar, that maybe they just didn't notice, and that I happen to not have the money to give him, and where these people would then thank me for notifying them, and because they too are good people, would happily go over and give to the beggar. I may not live in such a world, but such a world is possible. Here I refer you back to my lecture on the kingdom of purposes, which is about the third formulation of the categorical imperative that Kant gives. And there I describe that, according to Kant, we should act as if our will was a lawgiver in a kingdom of purposes that we inhabit with all other rational beings, with all beings that are capable of setting themselves a purpose. And there I said that if everyone did that, if everyone was moral, all purposes would be in perfect harmony. The purposes of people would not get in conflict with one another anymore, and therefore we would have realized the kingdom of God on earth, so to say. So there can only be a seeming conflict of our duties because the world as such is not fully good. Because maybe I am a good person, but not everyone else around me is. Because, speaking with Adorno, you cannot live a right life in the false. But in a perfect world, in a world of good people, in a world of angels, the moral duties would not be in conflict, and I would not have to sacrifice ever an imperfect duty for a perfect duty. With this distinction between the two types of duties, and with Kant stressing that the perfect duties must come first, every consequentialism is void and null. I already gave my own lecture about what Kant has to say about consequentialism, about how morality is not about the consequences of our actions, because that is what consequentialism says, right? Consequentialism and morality is any sort of theory that says it is not about your will, it is about the result. Do that which leads to the best result. And I discussed in that other lecture why that is a terrible moral principle. But here I can stress once more why it is a wrong moral principle. If you think about it, all consequentialism always comes down to saying you must violate your perfect duties sometimes in order to fulfill an imperfect duty. Whenever somebody says the ends justify the means, then these means violate perfect duties, and the ends are something that at best is an imperfect duty. Whenever you have utilitarianism, which is the most popular, the most well-known form of consequentialism, which is the moral principle that says create the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people or prevent the greatest pain, the greatest unhappiness, and then what you have is someone saying you are allowed to commit a crime, to harm someone's rights, in order to give something to people, in order to help people. Consider once again the famous trolley problem. I already discussed it both in that lecture on why the consequences of our actions don't matter in morality, and also my earlier lecture on human dignity. The trolley problem poses a scenario where there's a trolley on some tracks that is about to run over 5 people, and your only way of saving them is to pull some lever so that the trolley will instead go on a different track, where however it would run over 1 person. Now, from a utilitarian perspective, you make a simple calculation and you say 5 people alive is better than and 1 person dead is better than 1 person alive and 5 people dead. Again, I discussed this further in the lecture on why morality is not about the consequences of our action. There I explained what's wrong with that, how you don't really know what these 5 people are going to do afterwards. Maybe they are going to become murderers and you have actually doomed more people than you have saved. Like, consequentialism doesn't work because you never know the consequences of your actions in the long run. But that aside, Kant would say here, we have of course a duty to help people that are in danger. If someone is in danger, we have a duty to save his life if we can. But that is an imperfect duty. If we don't do it, we just failed to do something we should have done, but we didn't actively harm anyone's rights. On the other hand, however, we have a perfect duty not to murder, not to kill an innocent person. And if we do that, it is a sin of committing. We actually did an evil act instead of not doing a good act. So that means redirecting the trolley to save the 5 people but kill the 1 person would mean violating a perfect duty for an imperfect duty, which is precisely what we ought not to do. We first have to fulfill our perfect duties, in this scenario not murder anyone, and then if we can also fulfill the imperfect duty of saving people's life without murdering anyone, then that's great. And I said in a previous lecture that there's another scenario where people see this more clearly. In this scenario, you are a physician in some hospital or something, and you have 5 patients about to die that all need a new organ. One needs a lung, one needs new kidneys or whatever. And there's a 6th person who's completely healthy and who happens to have all the organs the others need. So, should you kill that 6th person and take his organs to save the 5? And this is precisely the same scenario as before. There is zero difference if you are aufklärt enough to abstract from sensuality. Sensually, of course, they are very different. And that is why many people would pull the lever in the trolley scenario, but would actually not kill this healthy person in the physician scenario. Because they are prisoners of their sensuality. But if you abstract from it, if you just think about it, about the underlying principle, then it's the exact same scenario. The scenario is 5 people are going to die, not because of you, but because of some destiny. And you can only save them by actively murdering a 6th person, which otherwise would not have died if it wasn't for you. Well, and here in this scenario, it is very clear to see that, yes, of course, the physician has a duty to help his patients, to save their lives if he can, but not at the cost of murdering someone else. Only if first his imperfect duties are fulfilled, if first he hasn't murdered anyone, then second, if he can do it without murdering, he should also save others' lives. So that is why this distinction is very important for morality, for Kant. But now the question could be how to actually make the distinction. Like, what is the actual difference? How do you know if something is a perfect or an imperfect duty? Well, you go, of course, by the categorical imperative. What exactly that is, I discussed in previous lectures. And I gave 3 lectures on the categorical imperative because to Kant there are 3 formulas of it. So as I stressed there, it is always one and the same moral law. It is 3 different ways of expressing it, of describing it, but they don't actually produce different moral duties. It's always the same law and the result is also always the same. Now, these 3 formulations, if you want to hear about them in more detail, if you want to understand them better, you gotta go back to these previous lectures. Here I will assume that you are somewhat familiar with them. You can make the distinction between the perfect and the imperfect duties by either of these formulas. Let's start with the first and the most well-known. That is the formula that says we should act in such a manner that the maxim of our actions, that is the subjective principle according to which we act, we could also want to become a universal law. that is an objective principle according to which everyone would act. According to this formula, you are violating your perfect duties if the maxim of your action could not possibly be a universal law. That is, if a world in which everyone acted like this was simply not possible, while you are violating an imperfect duty, if what you do could become a universal law, potentially, but such a world, while possible, is not wantable. In the first case, the violation of the moral law is a formal one, because you are acting against the very form of the law. In the second case, it's a material one, because you're doing an action that would be possible as an action done by everyone, but that goes against the actual purposes that human beings have. This might be pretty abstract, so let me give examples. Let's take theft. You see something that you want that belongs to somebody else, you take it. So that is now the maxim of your action, saying, whatever I would like to have, I take, even if it belongs to somebody else. Now ask yourself, what if everyone acted like that? What if everyone said, stealing, making others' property my own property is fine? Then you can realize such a world would simply be impossible. In such a world, property would no longer exist, and therefore stealing would also not be possible, because stealing means that you try to make something which was another's property your own property. I mean, the thief, let's say he breaks into someone's house at night. That means that he is not at his own home right now. He, while being away doing his work as a thief, wants his own home to be safe. He doesn't want it to be broken in. He probably, if he had to assume that someone would break in, he probably would stay at home to defend it and not go on his burglary. And why would he steal at all if he just knows that everyone steals? Like, let's say he steals money. He probably doesn't just want to have the money, he wants to spend it. Let's say he wants to buy a car with it. Well, if everyone steals, he has to assume that his new car will be stolen at the next best chance by somebody. So why would he buy it in the first place? It would not become truly his, because it could in the next second become somebody else's. And even if he did try buying a car, why would the car dealer even be a car dealer? Why would he be willing to sell the car for money? Because what is he gonna do with the money? He knows that whatever money he gets for selling a car could be stolen by somebody else. And even if the money is not stolen, that which he may buy with the money may then be stolen. And why would he buy something with money anyways when he can just steal it? So you can see that stealing can never become a universal law. The thief must want a world where there is such a thing as property, and where property is respected and his own property is safe. And therefore he self-contradicts so much when he makes an exception for himself by not respecting others' property. Now, on the other hand, if you witness a car crash and you see that somebody is unconscious, is bleeding, and you just walk by, you just ignore him. Or if you walk by a river and you see somebody is in there drowning and you just ignore him, you can ask yourself, what if this became a universal law? That is, what if nobody ever helped others in danger? What if all people just walked away ignoring the person that is about to die? And here you can realize that such a world would be possible It is not self-contradicting. But you cannot want, and nobody can want, to live in such a world. Because if you yourself were drowning or were having an accident, you would certainly want others to help you. And thereby you can say that not stealing is a perfect duty, and helping others in danger is an imperfect duty. And the same is true for the duties towards oneself, which I again discussed in a previous lecture. I said there that, for example, for Kant, suicide is immoral. You ought not to kill others, but you also ought not to kill yourself. And here Kant would say this is a perfect duty. Because why do people commit suicide? Usually they do so because they are deeply unhappy, like they may be depressed. That means they feel some sort of pain in their life and they want to end the pain, and that's why they end their lives. And that is a self-contradiction, Kant says, because pain has a purpose in nature. Pain is not something that is just bad and we would be better off without it. Rather, Kant very much believes that nothing in nature is just bad or wrong. Everything in nature has a purpose. This is something I will further discuss when I get to what Kant says about natural science and when I talk about Kant's thoughts on teleology. But he believes that everything has a purpose. And the purpose of pain in nature is to preserve life, right? Pain warns us that there is some sort of danger for my life, for my health, for my well-being, and is there to push us into preserving our health, our well-being, our life. So if I accidentally put my hand on something hot, on the hot hearth, then I burn myself, I feel pain, and immediately I pull back my hand and thereby prevent further and more terrible burns. So that means if you feel pain in life, if you feel unhappy, if you feel depressed, that should be something that drives you to do something about it, to in some ways change your life and make things better. But if instead it drives you to end life, then that would mean that pain no longer has a purpose, that pain defeats its own purpose, that which by nature is intended to preserve life now leads to destroy life. And therefore life would destroy itself. And that is a self-contradiction. And where's this gonna end? Kant would ask. At what level of pain would it be fine to commit suicide? There's no rational way of saying here is the limit and from here on it becomes reasonable to commit suicide. So if we make this a universal law, saying if something is too painful, if something becomes too unbearable, instead of fixing it, we will just end our lives, we will just take the lazy route. We could do that at the smallest pain. Like, I hit my toe somewhere. Sure, I could deal with that. Sure, the pain would end at some point. But the easiest thing would be to commit suicide, and then I will not feel this or any other pain anymore. So, if this was a universal law, if everyone acted like this, there would be no one left. That which is meant to preserve life would lead to us ending our lives. On the other hand, when it comes to imperfect duties towards ourselves, there is, for example, the duty to self-cultivation, to become better, to keep learning. So this goes, for example, for your job. Whatever your job is, you should try to improve, right? You should try to become a better teacher, a better physician, a better artist, whatever. Now, you might not want to do this. You might just be lazy. Like, let's say you tell yourself, well, I went to university, I studied so that I could get this job. Now, after like 5 years of university or whatever, I have my job, I have my steady income, everything is fine. Why should I keep on studying? Sure, as a teacher, I could try to learn the new developments in my subject. Like, let's say I teach physics or biology and I teach it for 30 years, surely my field will have moved on. And surely what I learned back then at university is outdated. And so, since I don't want to teach outdated things to my students, I will try to keep learning about physics or about biology. I could do that, but why? I'm already a teacher, I make my money, fuck those kids and whether what they learn is good or not, right? Or I could, because it's of course not just about the material, like the content of what I teach, it's also about how I teach. I could try to improve my teaching methods. I could always, my whole career, try to become a better teacher who gets better at explaining things, who gets better at motivating the students. But why would I when I already make my money? And anyone could be like that. The physician could try to become better at helping people, at identifying what actually is their illness, at curing it. But he could also say, I make good money as a physician, that's all I care about. Now, ask yourself, what if everyone was like that? What if this laziness to cultivate ourselves became a universal law? Then sure, everyone would be shit at their job. Everyone would just be doing the bare minimum. But it could still work. Or if we think this further, then we would never have developed. We would still be in the Stone Age. Like, there would be no teachers or physicians. We would still be collecting berries and roots and still go hunting, because nobody would have put in the effort and said, I want to become better at hunting, so I'm gonna try to improve my tools. I'm gonna invent the bow or whatever. I'm gonna invent sharper spears or whatever. No one would ever have done that. It would be possible. We could live like that, but nobody would want to live like that. We want to live in a world where everyone cultivates himself as much as possible, where everyone strives to be the best at what he does, where everyone has some work ethos, where everyone tries to improve his skills, his abilities, and thereby life for everyone else also. And since we want to live in such a world, we should also contribute to it ourselves. But this is an imperfect duty because we could live in a world where nobody does this. If we go with the second formula of the categorical imperative instead, that's said to always act in such a manner that we treat humanity, both in our own person and that of every other person, not simply as a means for some other purpose, but also always as a purpose in itself. Here Kant defines the perfect duties as the duty of not treating another as a mere means for my own purposes, while the imperfect duties are defined as duties that are about actually helping others in achieving their own purposes. So, as an example, if you enslave someone, that would be against the perfect duty, because here you're not only not helping that someone to achieve his own purposes, whatever those may be, but rather you are subjecting that person completely to your own purposes. You are completely taking that person's freedom away, degrading them, making them an object, a tool for your goals. On the other hand, if once again someone has an accident, a car crash, and you just walk by and don't help, then you are not making that person a means for your purposes. You are not using them as a tool to achieve your own goals. In that way, you are not harming that person's rights, but that person's own purpose is probably he wants to stay alive, and you are not helping in that. So you are violating not your perfect, but your imperfect duty. And finally, the third formula of the categorical imperative, the formula that says that we should consider our will to be the giver of a universal law in a kingdom of purposes. Here Kant actually himself doesn't directly say how the distinction between the two types of duties follow from this formula, but we can maybe deduce that easily ourselves. We could say that to have such a will, that the law that it gives, that is, if everyone had such a will, there could be a realm of purposes that would not sink into total chaos. That is, the various purposes of various rational beings would not get into direct conflict with one another. We could say that this is what the perfect duties are about, right? So there's some money that belongs to somebody else. His purpose is maybe to spend it for something, to buy something for himself. If I steal it, to use it for something else, to buy not what he wanted for himself, but to buy something that I wanted for myself, our purposes defeat one another. So I should have a will. I should only want purposes that are not in direct conflict with others' purposes, so that a realm, a kingdom of purposes that does not sink into chaos would be possible. On the other hand, if I have purposes that not only don't contradict, don't get in conflict with the purposes of others, but if my purposes are also their purposes, if I actually try actively to help those others, then that would be what our imperfect duties are about. So we could say the perfect duties demand that a realm, a kingdom of purposes with some sort of harmony is possible at all. The imperfect duties demand that such a realm, such a kingdom of purposes actually become the kingdom of God on earth, so actually become paradise. In other words, that people not just don't defeat each other's purposes, but help each other with their purposes and thereby make each other happy. So in that way, no matter which of the three formulas of the categorical imperative you use, you can always come to the same distinction between your perfect and your imperfect duties. Kant also names the two different types of duties, the duties of right and the duties of love. Because the one type, the negative duties, they are, as I already said, about not harming the rights of anyone. So they are about an inaction. While the others, the positive duties, are about an action that is about actively loving your neighbor. You could say that the right says don't take from anyone what is his, while love says give everyone what is yours. You can categorize all the different duties according to Kant's table of categories. I discussed that table of categories in my own lecture. to Kant there are these 12 categories of thinking, these 12 basic concepts that the human intellect deals with, and all our thinking, therefore also our moral thinking necessarily, is structured according to these 12 categories. And to Kant, it is very important to science that you are architectonic in science, not just rhapsodic. This also I discussed in its own lecture on Kant's scientific method, the architectonic. That is, you shouldn't just randomly look around what you may find, that may come to your attention, in this case what duties you can think of, but rather you should start precisely from this table of categories to know what general categories of duties you will find when you look around before you look around, so a priori. Well, how does Kant categorize the duties then? He does so according to the categories of relation. Those are the three categories of substance and accident, of causality and of community. Again, I explained all of that in the video on the table of categories. So, the duties of substance to Kant are the duties towards ourselves, both the perfect and the imperfect duties, because to him they are all about our substance. The perfect duties are about keeping, sustaining our substance. For example, don't commit suicide, don't self-harm. And the imperfect duties towards ourselves are about improving our substance. You could also maybe say they are about the accidents of that substance. So, for example, cultivate yourself, perfect yourself. Now, the second category, the category of causality, corresponds to the duties of rights towards others, Kant says, because this is basically about letting others be in their causality, not hindering their causality from having an effect. Right? If I steal from someone, he can no longer use that money to buy whatever he wanted to buy. If I actually kill someone, his causality in the world has completely ended. He cannot affect the world at all anymore. So all these perfect duties towards others to Kant are basically about letting the others be in their causality. The imperfect duties towards others, on the other hand, that is the duties of love, they are about being in active community with the others. Because if you think about it, the perfect duties could be fulfilled by simply not interacting with others. You could leave society, you could go live on a lone island, and that would mean you would not harm anyone's rights. You would not steal or rape or murder simply because you're not interacting with other people at all. But the imperfect duties, let's say to help those in need, cannot be done by just not interacting with them. And so Kant would say it is not enough to not harm anyone's rights, so therefore you're actually not a good person if you run away from society, if you just abandon society and just let the world burn. Okay, sure, maybe you haven't actually poured oil into the flames yourselves, you have not actively taken part in the burning, but letting the world burn is not a moral act. No, you ought to be part of society, you ought to seek some sort of closeness to other people, to live in community with them and to actually help them improve their lives. To Kant, we live as rational beings in this invisible kingdom of purposes with all other rational beings. I discussed that in the lecture on the kingdom of purposes, that to Kant there are these two kingdoms, two realms. There's the kingdom of nature, that we can see, that we can touch, this physical realm that is under natural laws. And then the rational beings are in this kingdom of purposes that we cannot see or touch, we can only think it, not perceive it, where we set the rules, where we set the laws ourselves, where we decide what our purpose is to be. And Kant says that there is a parallel between those two kingdoms. That is actually quite important in his philosophy. Again and again there are these parallels, these parallel structures, these analogies. And I keep stressing that because I want to stress that Kant's philosophy is an organic whole. You cannot just therefore accept part of it and reject another part. That would be like tearing an organ, tearing the heart out of a living being. You will then neither have the whole living being nor the heart, because the heart will also die if it is teared out of the whole. To Kant, the laws that govern these two kingdoms are actually similar, because he says the natural kingdom is governed by the law of attraction and repulsion. I will get into this more when I get to what Kant says about natural science. And in the kingdom of purposes, that is in the moral and the practical realm, Kant says there are reverence and love. The duties of right are more about reverence and reverence for people's rights, and the duties of love are about, well, love. And these two are similar to the natural powers of repulsion and attraction, because having reverence for someone means taking a step back respectfully, right? Giving that other person space. While love, on the other hand, means coming close, actually seeking closeness with that other person. It is not always easy, Kant would say, to strike the right balance between the distance that we should have towards others out of reverence, and on the other hand, the closeness we should seek out of love. I mean, too much distance might seem cold and uncaring, but too much closeness might be too much. It might be indiscreet. It might be overbearing. I mean, consider some friend of yours, let's say a beloved person of that friend dies, like his wife or his parents or whatever. What should you do in that situation? It might be an act of reverence not to push yourself onto that other person. I mean, maybe he's dealing with enough already. Maybe he doesn't also want to have to deal with you. Maybe if you were to call every day, to check on him every day, to try to constantly talk to him about his loss, that would only make it harder for him, because it would be a constant reminder of the loss. Maybe after some weeks, some months, he already somewhat got over it, but since you keep pushing, you keep asking, how are you? You keep treating him like he is some sort of raw egg that could easily break. Maybe that will somehow trigger him. Maybe that will make things harder for him. So here in this case, it might maybe be good to not be too loving, to not push yourself too much onto the other person, but to keep some distance out of reverence. On the other hand, If you only do this, if you try to be too tactful and leave him completely alone, that maybe you would be there if he called you, but you don't call this person in order not to tear up any wounds, in order not to trigger him in any way, then he might actually feel that you are an uncaring friend. And he might actually wish for you to call him, to check on him, to see how he is doing. In other words, to come a little closer and show a little more love. So it can be difficult to strike the right balance, to be loving, be there for others, but still be tactful, still respect their boundaries. Again, Kant would say the perfect duties always come first, so better be a bit too tactful, better be a bit too distant, but don't harm anyone's rights, than pushing yourself on others too much. But the ideal would be finding the right balance. And that right balance is what Kant calls humanity. So, unfortunately, in English, there are no two different words. Like, we also talk about humanity when Kant says morality is about having reverence for the humanity in every person. But here he uses the German word Menschheit. This humanity I'm talking about now, so this right balance between reverence and love, that he actually calls Humanität in German. So that is the old Latin, the old Roman virtue of humanitas. Kant would say that having manners is about at least appearing as having this sort of humanity, right? This is what manners try to express. Let's say I write a letter to someone and I use some respectful phrases. Like I say, dear Mr. So-and-so, dear Mrs. So-and-so. Maybe that person is not actually so dear to me. Or I end with regards, with high regards, or I end with respectfully yours, or whatever. Maybe I don't hold that person in such high regard. Maybe I don't have such high respect for that person. But I'm expressing it nonetheless. So manners try to express some sort of reverence, some sort of respect for the other. But at the same time, having manners also tries to express some sort of love, that is some sort of care. Like, it is an act of manners to ask, how are you? Maybe I don't actually care that much about how the other person is, but I act as if I cared, if I act with manners. And so, having good manners to Kant would mean acting as if I had this humanity, acting with a balance of reverence and love, distance and closeness, being tactful but not careless. But manners are something on the outside. Manners are only the appearance, only the facade. I can, of course, have good manners without having the true humanity. The true humanity is about what's on the inside. It's about my actual will. And of course, I should try to cultivate not simply manners, but actual humanity. Kant would also say that the highest, the most perfect balance of reverence and love is found in friendship. That is what friendship means to Kant. Because you can have reverence without love. You should have that for every person, right? You should treat every human being, because of his humanity, with reverence, respecting his dignity. And you can have also love maybe without having much reverence. Like you can have love for those that you don't consider equals but that are under you, like your children. Or you can even have love for non-human beings, for the animals. But in friendship, you have both reverence and love in equal measures for the other person, Kant would say. And from that it would of course follow, since he defines friendship in that way and since he defines humanity in that way, that even though he himself never outright states that, friendship is the highest expression of humanity. However, Kant also somewhat laments this, as noble and as beautiful and sublime a thing as friendship is, it also is sort of testimony to human wickedness that we even have friends. Because if one person is your friend and others are not, it means that that one person is more important, is dearer, is closer to you than the others, and that you can trust that one person more than all the others, all the random strangers. A nation of angels would not know friendship, because if everyone was equally good, everyone could revere and love each other equally, and everyone could trust each other equally, so you would not have to distinguish anyone exceptionally and say, I prefer to be with this person, or I prefer to talk with this person, or to open up to this person over others. So while it is a wonderful thing and a moral thing to have a true friendship, the fact that at the same time we need to have these exceptional friendships and cannot just have true friendship, true humanity in our relationship with everyone equally, also shows that we are not fully good as human beings, Kant would say. Now, what reverence means precisely to Kant, I already discussed in its own lecture on reverence, on the moral feeling. Here I want to focus on love. Kant agrees with the biblical, with Jesus' command to love thy neighbor. I've already mentioned in several previous lectures how Kant's morality as a whole is very much in agreement with the biblical morality. But Kant does say that we must interpret this commandment to love thy neighbor in the right way. Because to Kant, love can be pathological or it can be practical. Usually it is pathological. Pathological here does not mean sick in some sort of way. As already mentioned in previous lectures, whenever Kant uses the word, he uses it in the original sense. The Greek word basically just means the same as the Latin word passive. So the usual love that we feel, like the love parents have for their children, let's say, or the love that a couple has for one another, the romantic love, this is pathological. It is passive love in the sense that it just comes over us. We haven't chosen it. Maybe sometimes we would even like to be rid of it, like you are in love with someone and you wish that you weren't, but it's just there. We cannot just will it to disappear, and we can also not just will it to appear. And precisely for that reason, it is not a moral quality. To love or to not love in this pathological sense does not make you a better or a worse person. And Kant says this cannot have been meant by Jesus. It would be absurd to command someone to feel in a certain way, because we are not masters of how we feel usually. with the exception of the one practical feeling of reverence. Again, I addressed that in its own lecture. Rather, there's also practical love, Kant says, and practical love means acting towards someone as if we loved him, independently of our feelings. So practical love can come from pathological love, of course. Like if I feel love towards, let's say, my child, I will also treat it accordingly. But practical love can also be practiced without pathological love. So even while not loving a person, while from the point of feelings being indifferent or maybe even hating that person, I can still make myself act lovingly towards that person, act as if I loved that person. And this is because to Kant there are two types of love, or there are two ways in which we could understand the meaning of the word love. There is the love of complacency, which means loving somebody or something because we actually love the way he or it is. And then there is the love of benevolence, which means wanting for someone or for something what's best. And this love of complacence, again, is not something that we can be commanded because it's a feeling. We cannot be commanded to feel it. But the love of benevolence is about how we act towards someone, and that we can be commanded to have. So Kant would say that we cannot have the love of complacence for everyone, because there are certainly people that we will be very much discontent with, that we may even despise. But still we can want for these people what is best. We can still have the love of benevolence for them. And only this can be meant in the Bible, Kant would say. It cannot be the demand to feel complacence towards everyone, even towards the most wicked, the most evil people. And especially a holy person, especially God himself or Jesus himself, cannot possibly feel complacence with everyone, cannot possibly be content with everyone and happy about the way they are. In fact, the Bible shows that, right? Jesus certainly did not have the love of complacence against everyone. Certainly not towards the people that he was driving out of the temple, towards those moneylenders that misused the temple. But God, what Jesus has for everyone and what we should have for everyone, is this love of benevolence. And Kant would say that the duties of rights, the perfect duties, they are actually about complacence, so not with the people as they are, but with the moral law. So since we, so to say, like the moral law, since it is something good to us, we will follow it and therefore have reverence for people's rights. But on the other hand, we will help people, we will actively do good things for people, not because we necessarily like them the way they are, not we necessarily are content with them, but rather because we have this love of benevolence. Kant even says that if we consider human beings from the moral standpoint, if we judge them according to the moral law, we will not really feel complacence for them. We will rather feel the opposite. They are often so evil, so wicked. They fail so much in even doing their most basic duties that we cannot be very content with them. Rather, Kant would say that the good person, the person who cares about morality, will in his life, especially the older he grows, probably come to develop some sort of misanthropy. That is hate or contempt for the human beings. So here Kant stresses that this must not become a practical misanthropy, where we actively stop caring about human beings or even actively try to harm them, try to do whatever is bad for them. But rather, this is just something we feel. We feel discontent with human beings. We maybe even despise them inwardly. But that does not stop us from still acting with this love of benevolence, from still trying to help them however we can. It may, however, drive us, since we cannot love them. Now I'm talking about the love of complacence, not the love of benevolence, because in that way we can always love them. It may drive us, since we cannot love them for what they are, to avoid them more and more as we grow older. So Kant says at some point, falsehood, ingratitude, injustice, the childishness of the purposes regarded by ourselves is important and great, in the pursuit of which men inflict upon one another all imaginable evils, are so contradictory to the idea of what men might be if they would, and conflict so with our lively wish to see them better, that, in order that we may not hate them, since we cannot love them, the renunciation of all social joys seems but a small sacrifice. And I will add that the way Kant talks at several points about this inner misanthropy that can come with age, that, however, does not translate to practical misanthropy, that does not hinder the practical benevolence. The way he talks about that makes it clear that he himself probably felt that way. But be that as it may, he says we cannot make ourselves feel the love of complacence towards everyone, but we can make ourselves act with the love of benevolence towards everyone. So he also says at some point that if you keep doing what is good for someone or for something, over time you will also probably come to love that something, to in the sense of coming to like it. But be that as it may, Kant says that the reverence for others means that their private will obliges the will of all. So, for example, someone owns a piece of land and he has the will to stand there, or he has the will to plant a garden there. So this private will of his now obliges the will of all, out of reverence for him and his private will, to step back, to not push him from the spot where he chose to stand, or to not walk and trample on the flowers that he chose to plant. On the other hand, in love, it's the other way around. Here, the will of all obliges my private will, Kant says. That is, my private will is no longer just about me and what I would like to do. I want to plant these flowers here. But rather, because I love others, because I want what's best for them, make my private will whatever their will. So, for example, I may plant the flowers that I maybe don't care about particularly, but because I know that other people like these particular flowers and will be happy when they see them walking by. So what we should have for others. And what, according to Kant, Jesus meant when he said, love thy neighbor, is we should treat them with the love of benevolence. It is, however, important to understand this right. I mean, benevolence literally means wanting good, right? The bene is the good and volentia is the will or the wanting in Latin. Also in German, Kant basically says the same thing. He calls it die Liebe des Wohlwollens. Wohl means well and wollen means wanting. So the love of well-wanting. While the other, the love of complacence, he calls die Liebe des Wohlgefallens. The love of well-liking. So this is about well-wanting, wanting what is good for the other person, but this has to be understood in the right way. Because it, of course, does not mean to Kant that to the greedy person I give money, and to the person who is power-hungry I give power, and so on. Wanting what is good for others, wanting to help them, does not necessarily mean giving them whatever they happen to consciously desire right now. Rather, moral benevolence means wanting for others to aufklären themselves, meaning wishing for them to become true human beings, true rational beings. In other words, the love of benevolence towards someone means that I wish for him to become a person for which I could then also feel the love of complacence. So that means that an evil person, that means that the rapist, the murderer, even the liar, the way they currently are, I will not like them. I will not be content with them. And that means that probably if they were to drop dead this instant, I would not be very sad about the loss. But having benevolence towards them would of course not mean helping the murderer to murder, or helping the rapist to rape, or helping the liar to lie, but it means that I myself, even though personally I would not be sad if they drop dead, I myself will not go and kill them. Rather, I will wish for them to become better people, to stop being murderers and rapists and liars, to reform themselves, to see the errors of their way, to repent, to find redemption, and to become people that I actually can be content with, that I actually can love for what they are, that actually are an enrichment for their fellow human beings. And that I can wish upon everyone, and as far as it is in my power, I can even help everyone in that process. And that is what Kant means when he talks of practical love. And this is also the sense in which we can live, in which we can love the whole human species, all of mankind. Because Kant acknowledges that when somebody says, oh, I love all of mankind, I love everyone, it sounds kind of renomistic. And it sounds what he calls in German schwärmerisch, that is, it sounds raving, it sounds like some sort of madness. And indeed, when people with this mean the love of complacence, then indeed it is raving nonsense, Kant would say. If you have some sort of esoteric hippie type who says, oh, I feel love for every single human being, Kant would say, no, you cannot love 8 billion human beings in that way. However, what we can have is the love of benevolence towards every single human being. wanting for each and every single human being to become better, to become more aufklärt, more moral, more honorable, more respectable, to become someone we can have reverence for. So Kant would say, towards the individual, we can and we ought to have mostly this love of benevolence. It is the species as such, mankind as such, humanity as such, for which we can actually feel the love of complacence. So he would say not necessarily for the species as it is currently, because if we look around at the current human species, it's not so lovable, with all the wars going on and the oppression and the genocides. But Kant says we can love the species in its constant progress towards perfection. So not for what it currently is, but for what it could be and for what it is in the process of becoming. So you could say in conclusion, this practical love, once again, it is not about actually feeling love for what someone is, but acting with love, acting as if we loved him, trying out of this to make him better. And to this I would add, but I've already said in previous lectures, the one on reverence and the one on human dignity, that you could say that the reverence that according to Kant we ought to feel for others is similarly a practical reverence. He is not saying that we should necessarily feel direct reverence for every single individual, because again there are many people that we can only despise, that we cannot possibly feel reverence for because they are evil, they are pathetic, they are just contemptible. But we can still treat them as if we had reverence for them. We can still respect their rights. We can still give them their human rights out of reverence for their humanity. So that is what morality is about to Kant. Act towards others in your practical actions as if you had reverence for them, as if you had love for them, not because you necessarily have reverence or love for this empirical individual, for what Kant calls the homo phenomenon, the human being as he appears in the sensual world, but because you have reverence and also you have love for humanity, the supersensual humanity that you can think, for what Kant calls the homo noumenon. I will add to this that this distinction between these two types of love also applies to self-love. Self-love too can be, according to Kant, a love of benevolence or a love of complacence. And here he says benevolence everyone has towards himself. Everyone wants for himself what's best, or at least what he thinks is best. But of course not everyone feels this love of complacence towards himself. And here again, the love can be pathological or practical. People can, of course, feel pathological love of complacence for themselves. That is, they can be content with the way they are because they think, oh, I'm very successful, or I'm very attractive, or I'm very popular, or I'm very rich, and that's something I find good about myself. But at the same time, everyone can also find many reasons for being pathologically discontent with himself. Everyone can also find something that is wrong about himself. And here I want to stress once again what I have already said previously, what I've already said in the lecture on the duties towards ourselves, that nowadays there's a lot of stress about self-love and how important it is to learn self-love, but usually this is disconnected from morality, and usually people just mean some sort of pathological self-love. And that is why it usually doesn't work. Because when a person feels bad about themselves, when a person doesn't love themselves, because maybe the person says, "Oh, I'm too fat, I'm unattractive, or I'm too clumsy, or I'm too dumb, I'm not educated enough, so I cannot love myself," then they get told, love yourself for who you are. But I mean, in a way, they are right, even though the reasons they give might be wrong. In a way, they are right. What they are is pathetic and not lovable. What they are is a pathetic nothing. And now what they get told is, stay a pathetic nothing, but learn to love this pathetic nothing. But why should we love a pathetic nothing? No, what those people should rather do is to learn to not care about that which doesn't matter. That is anything that is just in the sensual world. It doesn't matter. It doesn't determine my worth, how attractive I am, or how successful in my job I am, or whatever. What matters, what determines my worth, is my moral character. Indeed, I even become more worthless if I care about things which don't matter for my worth. It is already a mark of an evil person to care about anything else except my own goodness, except my own rationality. If I say, "Oh, I'm a perfectly good person, my conscience is clear, I never do anything wrong," and still I hate myself because, let's say, I'm unattractive, I'm too fat, or if I say more realistically, I don't know if I'm a good person or not, maybe I'm not a good person, but I don't care about that so much. What I hate myself for is, once again, let's say, being unattractive, being too fat, then I'm a bad person. Because I say that to me, there is a higher measurement than reason. To me, because reason only cares about my morality. According to rational considerations, according to rational reflection, if I am good, I'm worthy, and if I'm not good, I'm unworthy. And I can't be unworthy if I'm good just because I'm not attractive or whatever. So if I care about that, then that alone proves that I'm unworthy. That alone proves that I'm not a good person. So if anything, I should despise myself for even caring about such things as my attractiveness or my success or my popularity or whatever. I should only care about my moral character. And I'm speaking here both from philosophical reflection as well as from experience. That is, experience what actually helps people when they are not content with themselves, if they have no self-love and so on. This is what is actually needed. We don't need to try to talk such people who may hate themselves, who have pathological discontent with themselves. We don't have to try to talk them into somehow loving with themselves, into somehow having this love of complacence for themselves as they are. Rather, we can tell someone, be a good person. Start caring about your rationality. Start caring about what truly matters. If you can say to yourself, honestly, I know that I have a good moral character. I know that I have righteous principles. And I know that I have the courage and the steadfastness to stand by them, no matter what happens, no matter how hard it gets to stand by them, then you will have the love of complacence for yourself. That is not for yourself as a homo phenomenon, as a sensual being, but for yourself as a homo noumenon, for yourself as a rational being. And finding that you have a pimple on your forehead, or finding that you have a few extra kilos, will not in any ways change that, will not in any ways take away from this higher sort of complacence with yourself. That's why whenever someone told me I feel worthless because I'm fatter than others, or because I'm less educated than others, I didn't tell them, okay, then lose weight or get educated. Nor did I tell them, okay, then learn to accept yourself as you are. But rather, I told them, you can of course try to lose weight and get educated also if you wanna. But you will probably find, even if you succeed in that you will still feel inadequate. And that you will still feel like you lack the approval that you seek from others. Rather, learn to not care about these things. Learn to not seek approval from others at all, because thereby you're already degrading yourself. You're already subjecting yourself, saying that you are inferior to these others, when in fact they are no better than you. And therefore, their approval is not worth more than your own. Rather, learn to seek only the approval of reason. Or if we want to put it in religious terms, learn to only seek the approval of God. Learn to only care about being a good person. Yet another way Kant distinguishes the two types of duties is saying that the perfect duties are duties of obligation and are done out of righteousness, while the imperfect duties are duties of charity that are done out of grace, or once again you could also say benevolence. And Kant says it is perfectly possible to be a very righteous person who is not charitable or who has no grace. You can, for example, imagine someone who is stingy and who never gives to the poor, not even a single cent, who is always like, no, they should work themselves, that's not my concern. Who never give gifts, who never gives to even to his own close family when they are in need. And yet that person could still be righteous, in the sense that yes, he is stingy with his own money, but at least he doesn't steal anyone's money. He also doesn't trick or swindle anyone to get more money. He is a righteous businessman. And he may, if he lends money to someone, he may demand it back on the date that was agreed on. He may not grant a single extra day, even if the other person begs him and says, oh, I'm poor, I need some more time to get that money back. If I pay you back now, it will ruin me. He may say, no, we agreed on this date, so you have to pay, or otherwise I will sue you. But he himself, when he agrees to pay back some money, when he lends money somewhere, may pay it back exactly on time. Such a person would be righteous, even though he would never do charity. He would do his obligations, but he would not act with grace. And Kant says that such a person, of course, cannot really be loved, because it's not a nice person, it's a very cold person. Indeed, we could even hate such a person, Kant says. For example, the poor guy that lends some money from him and is now forced to pay it back in time can very much hate this person. But we cannot truly despise this person, because after all, he is righteous. He never harms anyone's rights. Rather, despising or holding in contempt, that is something that is reserved for those people that act against others' rights, Kant would say. Kant would say, however, that only doing our duties of love on top of the duties of right gives us some sort of merit. Because simply doing our obligation, but not on top of that acting with kindness, not doing any charity, does not give us merit. I mean, it would simply be absurd and laughable if someone were to say, "Oh, I'm such a good person. I'm a hero. You should applaud me for how good, how noble, how heroic I am." If all he does is, and all he has to show for it is that he never stole from anyone, or that he never lied to anyone, or that he never murdered or raped anyone. I mean, that is the bare minimum. Doing all of these things, or rather not doing them, simply means, Kant says, that you are not guilty. But it doesn't mean that you have any merit. Only if after that, after not harming anyone's right, you also go out of your way to actually help others, to be kind, to do charity, only then do you earn some sort of merit. I find that an important point, because I have absolutely met people who think that they are very good people and who get easily offended when you question their goodness, simply because they are decent, respectable people who basically have never broken a law, who have never murdered anyone, and that is really not such a high bar. I mean, congratulations if you meet at least that bar, but it does not make you a particularly heroic person. However, Kant would also say in other points that for us there is no merit at all in morality, because you can only gain merit for doing more than you ought to do, more than is your obligation. But the good is precisely defined as that what we ought to do. Whatever is good is something we ought to do. And if we don't ought to do it, if it is not our duty, then it's also not good. And then it also cannot gain us any merit if we do it. I will stress once again that to Kant, not only the perfect but also the imperfect duties are duties. And merely doing your duty is not a heroic deed. Which is precisely why Kant says that if we go to heaven, and I will get more into that when I get to his philosophy of religion, if we go to heaven, it will be thanks to God's grace and benevolence, and not thanks to God's justice. Because the just thing would only ever be to either punish or to not punish, but not to reward. A just judge does not reward. He just says you are guilty, therefore you get punished, or you are not guilty, you are innocent, you fulfilled your obligations, you didn't harm anyone's rights, therefore you don't get punished, but you don't get rewarded for simply doing your duties. The reward comes from God only insofar as he is more than simply just, as he is also graceful and charitable. And therefore, when Kant says that we gain merit by doing the duties of love, this is not true in the strictest sense, this is not true in an objective sense, this is more true in a subjective sense. That is, in the eyes of other human beings, we may gain merit. Here we may even appear as a hero if we have done lots of good deeds, if we have donated lots of money, if we have worked hard, volunteered to help others, if we have been an activist, if we have even risked our lives to help others, we may therefore be loved and applauded by others. But objectively, in the eyes of reason, in the eyes of God, we still have done not a single thing more than what is our duty. That is also why I would disagree with Kant when at some point he says not doing the duties of love does not make you directly guilty. It just means that you have no merit. Surely you are guilty when you violate the duties of rights, when you, let's say, murder someone or steal. But I would say that if you see in front of you someone having an accident and you just walk by, and now that person bleeds to death, it's not just that you didn't gain any merit, you also gained guilt in this case. But anyways, there's not just righteous people that are without any charity and kindness. There's also the opposite, and it is much more common. Kant speaks about it often. There are people, he says, who are friends to everyone, who are always kind and helpful, but who never truly have reverence for others' rights, who never do their actual obligations. They give you the cherry on top, but they don't give you anything that is actually below the cherry. So such people might be very giving and might constantly donate money, let's say. But if they actually lend money from you, they will not pay it back in time. Maybe precisely because they have given it away. They, on their way to give it back to you, they saw some beggar, and without thinking they gave the beggar the money. Even though they promised to give it to you today, and you counted on that maybe, you needed that maybe, but even if you didn't need it, it's simply what they were obliged to do, and they didn't do it. Or they may always be there if you need somebody to talk. They may always try to help with advice, with being there for you. But then they have no regard for secrets, and they will mindlessly share with others what you have told them. And such people, Fichte would call them heroic characters, because they want to be heroes, right? They want to not just do their obligation, not just revere others' rights, but they want to be more than they want to do more than their obligation. They want to be actual heroes. And such people actually hate the moral law. They hate rights. Because rights are something that obliges you. When another person has a right to this thing because he owns it, when he has a right to this money because you owe it to him, when he has a right to live simply because he's a human being, then that puts some sort of force on you if you are a moral being. And at the same time, you don't earn any merit by respecting that right. You simply become not guilty, but it's not something that you can be applauded for or get a pat on the back for. So these heroic characters, they actually don't want to submit to the moral law. Rather, they want that they themselves, with their own arbitrary choices, with their own private will, so to say, are the only lawgiver. They want to themselves determine, as this specific empirical individual, this homo phenomenon, what is good and what is bad. And good is whatever they do, and bad is whatever others demand from them. So such people can at the same time be very giving, but get very angry and accuse you of being small-minded. When you actually demand anything from them, no matter how rightful that demand is. Like, such people may give out money freely, they may donate, they may invite you to dinner and pay for you, they may give expensive Christmas gifts, but then maybe one time you gave them €5, like you invited them maybe to dinner because right now they didn't have the money, but you agreed that they would give you back the €5 in a week, and then maybe you remind them a month later that they still haven't given it back, and they will just get angry at you and will say, oh, it's just €5, don't be like that, don't I do enough for you already? And such people are absolutely despisable and contemptible. There's nothing moral about them at all, as heroic and as friendly and as kind as they may appear. And such heroic characters, because once again they hate the moral law, they hate human rights, they hate being reminded that they themselves are not the highest authority, that morality is not about their arbitrary choices to be good, to be kind, to be gracious, but rather that morality demands things from them, that morality obliges them. That is why they hate being criticized. I've often experienced this, that when I talk to such people, and let's say I remind them how their consumerism, how them buying useless things, how them flying on vacation, how that actually actively harms people, how they take part in oppression, how they take part in genocide, how they take part in the destruction of our living conditions through the climate crisis, how they angrily respond with, oh, but I donate 5% or 10% of my income every month to good causes. Do you do that? Or recently there was this earthquake or whatever. I donated €200. Have you donated that much to it? Or once, many years ago, I witnessed someone in winter breaking into the ice in some lake, and I pulled him out and saved his life. Have you done that? And now I may or may not have done that. And let's say you haven't done it, then it's still an open question why you haven't done it. Have you not done it because you lack the goodwill to do it, or simply because you had no opportunity to do it? Like, maybe you simply never witnessed someone breaking into the ice, but you would have pulled a person out too if you witnessed that. Or maybe you didn't donate so much money because you're poor and cannot donate, but if you had the money, you would. I remind you, I talked about this in a previous lecture, that to Kant it is the goodwill that counts in morality, not the actual actions and their consequences. But be that as it may, even if it were the case that you have not done such heroic things, spending lots of money to the victims of an earthquake, pulling someone out of an icy lake, maybe what you have done is not actively harm anyone's rights, not overconsume, not fly around, not buy things that you don't need, not participate in exploitation or in the destruction of the environment. And that is worth much, much more, Kant would say. He would say that one single misdeed that harms someone's rights completely annihilates all good charitable acts that you may have done. They all are worth less than one time respecting someone's actual rights. However, Kant also acknowledges that usually people see it the other way around. Usually people will see such a heroic character as actually heroic and will applaud him, and will not allow such a person being criticized by someone who does not have such heroic acts to show for, no matter how righteous that critic may be. Because generally, Kant says, people hold action in higher esteem than inaction. Nevertheless, he says a person is worth much more that has never committed a crime than a person who commits many crimes and then compensates them with even more charitable acts. And it says a lot about a thinker, about a philosophy, about an age, what type of morality they value or they preach. In his own day, in the 18th century, in this time of sentimentality, of the teaching of the moral feeling, the moral sense theory, Kant very heavily criticizes that moral teachers, that preachers, that poets, that educators of his age try to appeal to people's feelings of sympathy, of compassion, of magnanimity, of grace, of charity, of benevolence, that they try to appeal to people to be heroes, in other words, when Kant says they should rather stress the importance of human rights and of actual duty and obligation. They should not say, oh, help someone because it would be a graceful act, because you should have compassion, go be a hero. Rather, they should say, help someone because it is your duty to have reverence for his humanity and to support this humanity. And because if you don't do it, then you must be despised. Then you are worthless. Then you are not worthy of being called a human being. Kant wanted the educators, the preachers, the poets to stress a morality of manliness and virtue, to stress a morality that is about actually having reverence for the rights of people, that is about actually doing your obligations and not trying to be a hero or anything. Not making it about yourself and you being so great, but making it about the moral law and what it actually demands from you. And Kant even says that wisdom, and I said in the lecture on what is wisdom, I explained already there that it is a practical thing to Kant, that it is mainly about morality. Wisdom to him is ultimately nothing else but the disgust or the abhorrence for anything that goes against the rights of humanity. But since Kant's days, since the 18th century, it has only gotten worse. If you look around in our day, the highest moral value or the highest virtue to people, when you hear them talk, seems to be empathy. We constantly get told about empathy, about compassion. And on the other hand, there seems to be nothing worse, there seems no bigger vice than toxicity. Being toxic seems to be the worst a person can be. But of course, if you think about it, toxicity mainly means not being kind, not being too nice to others. You can be a perfectly righteous person, always respecting and revering and regarding everyone's rights, and still get accused of toxicity because maybe you appear a bit cold or harsh, or because maybe you don't care enough about not stepping on anyone's toes, about people's sensitivities, because maybe you are too straightforward, you are too honest, too truthful. That can be toxic. So you can be a good, a righteous person and still be accused of being toxic. And nowadays, morality is usually so much so equated with empathy, with compassion, that people cannot even imagine any other kind of morality, which of course also leads to many misinterpretations when they deal with other kinds of morality, when they deal with philosophy. I mean, just think of how they keep misinterpreting Nietzsche, who is very much against the morality of compassion, to be sure, but people misunderstand him and think that he is against any sort of virtue, which he is not at all. It's just that to him, compassion is certainly not the highest virtue. A particular example to me of our current morality and how it goes wrong, because it doesn't look at duty, at obligation, at rights, it only looks at love, at charity, is this constant stressing of tolerance. Tolerance being such a high virtue, apparently. Well, to tolerate, if you think about it, that is something that someone who is superior can do towards someone who is inferior. It is a virtue of rulers. The king can tolerate. But it is wrong to say that we should tolerate different religious beliefs, or that we should tolerate immigrants, or that we should tolerate homosexuals. No, we should not tolerate them. Rather, it is our duty to give them their rights. Tolerance is a grace. We grace someone with our tolerance. We could always take it back because we don't owe him the tolerance. But we don't owe it to people to let them believe what they want or to let them love who they want. It's not an act of tolerance. And the left has done itself a disservice by stressing that it is about tolerance. Because once you make people believe that, let's say, people of other faiths don't have a right to their faith, that homosexuals don't have a right to their sexuality, we just tolerate them because we are being nice and kind, then it is perfectly reasonable for some right-wingers to say, well, I don't want to be nice and kind. I don't want to tolerate. If it's up to me, if it's just an act of grace, then I withhold my grace. Maybe I have my reasons for that. Maybe it turns out that the tolerance leads to bad side effects or whatever. No, what we should have told them is that it is their duty, that it is not an act of tolerance. Kant actually applauds the Prussian king at the side, Frederick the Great, Frederick II, who wanted to be an aufklärt monarch. He applauds him for, as Kant says, putting away with the arrogant name of tolerance and acknowledging that it is his duty to accept any sort of faith in his realm, in Prussia. Now, that is not to say that Kant is completely against tolerance. There is a place for tolerance, but it belongs to the duties of love, not to the duties of right. Tolerance to Kant means that I allow other people some missteps, that I allow for them to be tactless sometimes, that I allow for them to be imperfect, and I won't immediately and harshly judge them for it or even hate them for it. I will overlook their small missteps. That is an important virtue that has its place, but it should not be confused with actually having reverence for people's actual rights. So, if my neighbor is being loud late at night, I don't know about your laws, but at least here in Germany you're not allowed to be loud past 10 p.m. So You cannot have your washing machine running or your vacuum cleaner or whatever. You cannot listen to too loud music that might disturb others who might want to sleep. So if my neighbor is loud that late, that is something I can tolerate because I'm a kind person. I can say, okay, let him have his music. It is maybe 1 minute past 10. I could call the police on him. I won't do that. I will let him listen to his music another hour. I don't want to go to bed right now anyways. That is tolerance. But if my neighbor has another face than me or another sexual orientation, it's not a matter of tolerance. It is simply my duty to let him be, to give him his freedom and to not take away from his freedom. And I find again and again that exactly those who talk about tolerance, exactly certain leftists, often turn out to be the most intolerant. They are not fine with people being righteous, with people having reverence for others' humanity, with people accepting everyone as he is. No, they also need people to conforming to certain rules of speech, for example. So they are not fine with someone not being racist and accepting black people as they are. No, they also say you mustn't say the N-word. They are not fine with someone accepting Roma people as they are and not being racist against them. They also say you must call them Roma or Sinti. You must not say gypsies. Well, maybe it would be better to not say gypsy, to not say nigger, to not say Indians to Native Americans, whatever. We could discuss that. But if someone uses such a word and is a person who is not racist, is a person who treats everyone the same, then even if it is a bad word, we should be able to tolerate this use of the bad word. We should be able to overlook this small misstep and not directly, immediately jump on that person and treat him like he's the worst human being ever. We should reserve that for the actual racists. But as much as our time stresses the importance of empathy, of tolerance, that is, of everything that belongs to the imperfect duties, the perfect duties, the rights, the actual direct obligations that we have, that's something our time cares about very little. And not only does it care about it very little, there's also often, when it comes to rights, they are treated very mindlessly. There's often a very simple-minded confusion between what is and what ought to be. That is, there's this positivism. That is, people just go with whatever happens to be the laws of the state or the norms of society, and they treat that as if those are the rights that humans should have, and they don't ask, are things actually right as they are? Kant is already aware of that, and he says that some things are right or just even though nobody does it, and other things are not right, are against the human rights, are unjust, even though everyone does it. And that is a very important remark of his. That was true in his time. That was certainly true in the time of the Nazis, when everyone participated in killing the Jews, but that didn't make it right. But it is still very much true in our time. So many things people don't think about, people take for granted, are actually not right. And so many things that might be right are not done or are not even allowed. So, for example, here in Germany in the last years, in the climate debate, the right-wingers, the right-wing liberals, libertarians, they have been screaming about Verbotspolitik, the politics of prohibition. That's what they accuse the leftists, the Green Party of, that they constantly want to attack people's freedom, that they constantly want to prohibit things. But they talk about this when it comes to flying or driving cars or eating meat, and they say, oh, you can't prohibit this, which, by the way, no one tried. Not amongst the leftists or the Green Party either. But that's another story. They act like somebody wanted to prohibit these things. You can't prohibit this. This is our freedom. And Verbotspolitik, politics of prohibition, has become this nasty word. No one wants to be accused of it. So no one dares, including amongst the leftists, to try to prohibit anything. But if you think about it, politics of prohibition as such is not a bad thing. In fact, politics should prohibit things, and nobody complains about the politics of prohibition when it comes to murder being prohibited or raping children being prohibited. Somehow we find politics of prohibition fine when it comes to that. So apparently it is not prohibition as such which is a bad thing. Injustice, harming the rights of others, should be prohibited. And also, there are other things that are prohibited where also you don't hear these right-wingers complain, even though there is no rational reason why it should be prohibited. There is prohibitions for various drugs. There is the prohibition of incest. There is in most parts of Germany the prohibition for women with hijab to work as teachers, which is unconstitutional. There have even been rulings about this. It's not just my opinion. It's unconstitutional. But since we don't really have the rule of law here, it is still in place. And somehow you don't hear these right-wingers complain about the politics of prohibition when it comes to that. And that is, of course, because when it comes to, let's say, incest, it is not normal to engage in incest, so therefore most people find it alright if it is forbidden. On the other hand, it is normal to fly on vacation, so most people would not find it alright to prohibit it. But what should and shouldn't be prohibited should not be judged by what happens to be normal in a particular society, because injustice can very much be normal, but rather it should be judged by reason. We should ask, is this an action that attacks others' rights? Then it should be prohibited. Or is it not? Then it should be allowed, which, by the way, does not mean that we necessarily agree with that action, but if it does not attack someone's rights, then it is not our right to prohibit it. It used to not be normal at some point to accept homosexuality. It used to be normal at some point to have slavery or to have gladiator fights. What is just and right and what is not right and unjust cannot be judged by what happens to be normal, what happens to be the common customs and practices and prejudices of people, but rather it can only be judged by reason. And all of this is not to mean that Kant is against the duties of love, that he wants to somehow devalue them, or say that they don't matter or that following them is bad. But what he does wish for is that people would take the duties of right, that people would take their direct obligations as more important and more serious than charity and kindness. The latter is just what comes after. He stresses that while there can be reverence without love, love, on the other hand, should always be grounded in reverence. Maybe there can be some sort of love without reverence, but it would be a wrong sort of love. It can even be an overbearing love. It can even be a love where out of love, thinking you know what's best for someone, for example, thinking you know what's best for your children, you become despotic and tyrannical. No, reverence should always come first, and love should be grounded in it. And as I already said, to Kant, all acts of charity, all acts of kindness are worthless in the face of one single act of injustice. So he wishes for people to first try with all their power to be righteous, and then on top of that they can also try to be kind. And that kindness, that charity, that grace is only really needed to help there where righteousness is not enough, because the world in total is not righteous, is not just enough. Because if everyone was good, if everyone was just, then charity would not even be needed. Then there would not be any poor people, for example, that need my charity. So Kant recommends to be righteous first. He even recommends to sort of overstress righteousness. So even the duties of love should be ideally taken as duties of obligation. Even acts of charity should be treated by myself, and also when I teach others morality. For example, Kant recommends this when we try to teach morality to children, that even the acts of charity should be treated as if I was just doing my obligation, as if I didn't act out of grace, but just gave the other person what I owed him. And Kant says this is good for both sides, because for the poor person who gets the charity, it helps with his self-regard and self-respect, self-reverence, because if I make him feel that this is an act of charity, that he is dependent on my grace, on my kindness, then he may lose self-respect, and then he may start to beg, and he may start to try to get on my good side, and he may degrade himself trying to please me so that I keep giving charity. He can have more reverence for himself, he can live with more self-respect, with more dignity, if I don't make him feel that this is charity, but like I owe this to him. And on the other hand, for myself, this prevents me precisely from developing this heroical character. This prevents me from moral arrogance, thinking I'm such a great person because I'm so charitable. No, I can thereby humble myself if I keep telling myself, this is not really charity, I'm just giving the other person what I owe to him. But most of all, this way of viewing things is simply the right one. Because we live in a civil society, and the civil society is built on injustice, Kant would say. And he says at some point, one can share a part in the general injustice despite not doing an injustice to anyone, according to the civil laws and institutions. Since the civil society is built on injustice and exploitation, here we have every single one of us, no matter how righteous we are in our personal life, we have much more obligation. We owe much more to other people, particularly to the poor people who are less well off, than we would in a natural state where there was no such civil society. Kant says that some are so well off is only thanks to others being less well off. And one man's powder might take away another man's flour for his bread. You can only consider the donation you give to the poor, to be an act of charity and grace and kindness and nothing else, if you are very short-sighted and don't have a more holistic picture of things and of society. Because Kant would say that that poor person is poor in the first place, and that you are wealthy enough to give to the poor in the first place, that is in large part a matter of fortune and misfortune, be it your own, be it the ones of your ancestors that already gave you a better start in life, better education, more money that you inherited, whatever. Kant is still free, pretty much entirely free, of the ideology and prejudices of the 19th century, the capitalist ideology according to which everyone could get from dishwasher to millionaire, and according to which it is just a matter of how hard you work, and therefore if you are rich, this is your own accomplishment, and if you are poor, this is your own fault. Kant doesn't have these prejudices yet. He often stresses in his lectures that nature has provided enough for all of us. And I mean, of course, he lived in a time when there were way less people on Earth than now. But even now, even with 8 billion people, like the Earth could probably feed about 20 billion and we are just 8 billion. So it still holds true when Kant says nature has provided enough for all of us, and by nature, no one would have to be poor, no one would have to starve. It is just society which introduces inequality, which introduces injustice. So all poverty, not lack of richness, but actual poverty, actually people starving, that is always artificial. That is always a product of society, and would not be the case if these same people just lived in nature and truly had the same opportunities as all other people. The earth is rich enough for all of us. Poverty only exists because some people take too much. And since taking too much is an injustice, means actually violating people's rights, when those same people or those who profit from it then do some charity, that is really less than the bare minimum. And that is really not something to be applauded, because once again, they just give back a small part of what they owe to others. And with these sentiments and reflections, Kant is ahead of his own time, because it is only after his death, it is only in the 19th century that the modern concept of society is really born. It is therefore the 19th century which starts talking about sociology as the study of society, about socialism as maybe a more social, more just way of organizing society, of the social question. This didn't exist yet in the 18th century. But Kant is not just ahead of his own time, he is still ahead of many people of our day. Today we are used to usually consider morality as an individual thing. That is, we look at the isolated individual and how he acts towards others. We often don't consider the bigger picture. So surely if an individual is stingy, let's say, and despite being well off does not give money to the poor beggar, we may say that that person lacks love for his neighbor, that that person has no grace, no kindness, that he is not such a good person. But Kant stresses that such a person does not only not give to others, if he is stingy, he actually takes from others. Because if he collects and amasses money, he basically takes it away from others. He takes it out of the economic circulation. And I mean, he could use that money to invest. He could use it to buy products that would then need to be produced by others. He could thereby, with his wealth, actually create jobs, create incomes for others. Instead, if he just takes it to himself, if he's like Scrooge McDuck and just hoards the money in one big tresor, then what he does is making everything more expensive for everyone else, right? And that is an act of injustice, Kant would say. He says that you have no right to take what others could use for their welfare and prosperity when it doesn't even serve your own welfare and prosperity, because you're already prosperous enough. And that, I think, is a very interesting remark and very interesting consideration of Kant's, that unfortunately you don't hear discussed much when people discuss his moral philosophy. But from that, if we take it seriously, could follow a lot of interesting things, let's say, for current political debates about taxation of the rich, or about maybe a limit, a cap on how rich you can get. But those are things that could follow from Kant, not things that Kant himself says, so I will not get into that here. What I will say before I finish this off is that Kant says about the sentiments of his own of the 18th century, where virtue is praised so much and rights, justice are ignored so much, that he says about this something which kind of reminds you of Adorno's statement that there is no right life in the wrong. That is, Kant says, there's always so much talk about virtue. However, one first has to end the injustice before one can be virtuous. One has to end leisureliness, luxury, and everything which oppresses others through elevating me, so that I won't be one of all those who oppress their kind. All virtue is impossible without this decision. It really is a shame that this aspect of Kant's moral philosophy is not stressed more, despite him himself being very clear about it, because it is very relevant, not just to his 18th, but to our 21st century. All of us in the wealthy nations, in the nations of the global north, which I assume most people listening to this will probably come from, all of us, no matter how much we try to not take part in exploitation or to reduce our ecological footprint, all of us, simply by virtue of being parts of these societies, do take part in the destruction of the earth and in exploitation. And you can spend 100 euros or dollars, or you can spend even 1,000 euros or dollars to poor people in Africa. That will really just be a drop in the ocean compared to all the harm you probably cause in Africa. The coffee you drink in the morning is probably grown somewhere on African land where people could instead grow food for themselves. And the people who grow your coffee probably get paid close to nothing. The smartphone you use probably was built with some rare earth, some materials that were extracted from the earth through some sort of slave labor, through child labor, that bloody wars were fought over. You may look back on past times of colonialism and imperialism with disgust, and you may despise company of the past like the East India Company, but then you probably eat cornflakes for breakfast from a company like Nestle, which is actively responsible for people starving and dying of thirst, which actually buys wells and water sources so that people in some African village cannot access their own water. They by nature would have enough water, maybe. They wouldn't have to die of thirst, but it is taken from them. This is precisely why it is so important, and sadly also so exceptional, that Greta Thunberg has always, even at 15 already, when she started her protest, stressed the importance not just of saving the climate, but of climate justice. She has always stood for justice, which of course the media has overlooked as long as it was possible, as long as they could celebrate her as this cute child fighting for the trees or whatever. And when it could not longer be overlooked that she stands not just for saving the climate, but for justice, that is when she started fighting for justice for the Palestinians also, she immediately got cancelled. But no, that was precisely her point from the start. She always stressed, not only do we in the global north need to reduce our emissions, we need to reduce them even more than would be strictly necessary, so that poorer countries in the global south still have the opportunity to somewhat industrialize, to somewhat increase their standard of living, because only that is just. That's also why it's so ridiculous and so in bad faith when she has been attacked sometimes as this privileged child who whines about her childhood being stolen when others have it worse. That's precisely what she said in her famous speech in front of the UN. She said, "You have stolen my childhood, and yet I am one of the lucky ones. Others have it way worse." And she always stood for justice. And so once again, I've always already referred to her in some of my previous lectures, she, more than probably anyone who's in the public sphere right now, very much exemplifies, whether she knows it or not, this Kantian morality and its spirit. And what Kant says is that if everyone was completely righteous and just, if we lived in a society where everyone's rights were completely respected, then there would hardly be any need for grace, for charity, for kindness, because then the only causes for misfortune, for unhappiness, would be like natural catastrophes or sicknesses befalling people, Kant says. But only in those cases would people then still depend on other people's charity and other people's grace. But there would, if everyone was righteous, and if everyone just did their duties of obligation, not even their duties of charity, then there would be no one that is poor and that even needs this charity under normal circumstances. My deep thanks be to my supporters, Thomas Deuringer, Gernot Klaufen, Benjamin Lehning, Ökobong, Samet Özkilic, Yasin Özün, Alexander Reuter, Lisa Rinner, Ron Suhl, as well as to all others who support me and my aufkläring cause.